I didn't start a war with my neighbor. I just followed her instructions exactly the way she wrote them. And somehow that ended with half a hillside sliding straight into her backyard at 2 in the morning. Funny how that works. My name's Daniel Harper. I'm 47, been working as a landscaper most of my adult life, and for the past 20 years I've been living on this sloped stretch of land just outside Eugene, Oregon. It's one of those quiet neighborhoods where everybody pretends to mind their own business, but still notices everything. You know the type. Coffee mugs on porches, dogs barking at nothing, people waving but never really stopping to talk. My place sits higher than the 3 houses downhill from me. Not by a little either, about 8 feet higher from my backlot line. When I bought the property back in 2004, it didn't take long to realize that hill behind my yard wasn't stable. First heavy rain that winter, I saw the soil shifting just enough to make me uneasy. Not dramatic, just subtle, like the ground breathing. And I've been doing this long enough to know subtle is where trouble starts. So I did what any responsible guy would do. I called in a structural engineer, got the soil tested, pulled permits, and ended up building a retaining wall. Nothing fancy, railroad ties stacked and anchored deep, about 35 feet across and 8 feet tall. Ugly? Yeah, absolutely. It looked like something you'd see holding up a highway embankment, not in a residential backyard. But it did its job. It held back close to 200 cubic yards of earth, kept my yard level, and more importantly, kept the houses below from dealing with runoff, flooding, or worse. And for 20 years, nobody complained. Not once. In fact, the couple who used to live right below me, the Parkers, they used to thank me every rainy season. I remember Mr. Parker once standing at the fence line during a storm, rain coming down sideways, and he just yelled up at me, "Dan, that wall of yours is the only thing keeping my basement dry." We both laughed, and that was that. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. Everybody understood that. Then last spring, everything changed. That's when Melissa Crane moved in. Now Melissa wasn't like the rest of us. You could tell the moment she showed up. New SUV, spotless, probably detailed twice a week. Contractors in and out for a solid month, redoing the entire backyard. She put in this sleek infinity pool that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Glass railing, stone tiles, soft lighting, the whole deal. I'll give her credit, it looked good. Real good. And about 2 weeks after she moved in, she became the new HOA president. Yeah, that part mattered. I met her properly maybe a week after that. I was out back trimming hedges when I heard her voice from down the slope, sharp and confident, the kind of voice that doesn't ask, it announces. "Excuse me, Daniel, right?" I walked over to the edge, wiped my hands on my jeans, and said, "Yeah, that's me." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, I'm Melissa Crane. I just moved into the Wilson property below. I wanted to talk to you about that retaining wall." And right there, something in my gut tightened. I leaned on the fence, looked down at her, and said, "What about it?" She tilted her head slightly, like she was evaluating a piece of furniture. "Well, it's just visually very harsh. It completely disrupts the aesthetic of the neighborhood, especially now that we've invested in upgrading our outdoor space." I actually laughed a little, not because it was funny, but because I thought she had to be joking. "That wall's been there 20 years, I said, "long before your pool showed up." She didn't laugh. "Yes, I understand that. But standards evolve. As HOA president, it's my responsibility to ensure properties meet current guidelines." There it was. HOA. I straightened up a bit, crossed my arms. "That wall is structural. It's not decoration." She gave me this polite little nod, like she was humoring me. "I'm sure it serves a purpose, but it can be replaced with something more refined. Natural stone, perhaps. Something that complements the view instead of ruining it." "Ruining your view," I said, and this time I didn't bother hiding the edge in my voice. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, we spent a considerable amount designing our backyard to take advantage of the landscape. That wall is, frankly, an eyesore." I just stared at her for a second, letting that settle. 20 years of keeping that slope stable, and now it's an eyesore. "Look," I said finally, "that wall holds back the hillside. You take it out without proper engineering, you're asking for trouble." She smiled again, that same tight smile. "Then I'm sure you'll handle it properly." That was the first conversation. The second one came in the mail. Certified letter. 30 days to remove the wall or face daily fines. $200 a day. And just like that, it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a demand. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, reading that letter over and over, feeling this slow burn building in my chest. Not anger, not yet, more like disbelief. The kind that makes you shake your head and laugh under your breath because it's so ridiculous it almost doesn't feel real. But it was real. And the thing about me is, I don't rush into fights. I've been around long enough to know that the loudest person in the room isn't always the one who wins. Sometimes you just step back, gather your facts, and let people walk themselves into their own mess. So that's what I did. I pulled out my original property survey from 2004. Every line, every measurement, clear as day. That wall sat entirely on my land, not an inch over. Then I dug up the building permit, stamped and approved, with the engineer's signature still crisp on the page. And just to be absolutely sure, I called in another soil engineer. Cost me about $3,000, but I wanted it in writing, no gray area. He came out, walked the slope, took samples, ran the numbers, and when he handed me the report, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you remove that wall without replacing it immediately, this slope will fail." Not maybe will. That word stuck with me. Will. So I put everything together, survey, permits, engineer report, and I sent it all to Melissa with a letter. Not aggressive, not threatening, just clear. I explained what the wall did, what would happen if it came down, and I warned her, plainly, that forcing its removal could cause serious damage to the properties below. I figured that would be the end of it. People tend to rethink things when you show them consequences in black and white. But Melissa didn't rethink anything. A week later, I got a response. Not from her attorney. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the wall anymore. It was about control. The letter from her attorney was short, cold, and written in that polished legal tone that sounds reasonable until you actually read what it's saying. It basically boiled down to this. Yes, the wall was on my property. Yes, I had permits, but HOA standards still applied, and I was required to bring the structure into aesthetic compliance. And if I didn't, they were prepared to pursue legal action. I remember sitting there at the same kitchen table, letter in one hand, coffee going cold in the other, just staring out the window at that wall. 20 years of doing its job without a single complaint, and now suddenly it's a problem because someone with a nicer backyard doesn't like how it looks. I didn't get mad. Not yet. Instead, I called my attorney. Now, my attorney, Greg Lawson, he's not the flashy type. No big speeches, no dramatic pauses, just a calm guy who's seen enough nonsense to recognize it early. I sent him everything, the HOA letter, my documents, the engineer's report, and when he called me back, the first thing he did was chuckle. Not loudly, just this quiet, knowing laugh. "Dan," he said, "you're not going to like my advice, but it's the right move." I leaned back in my chair. "All right, let's hear it." He paused for a second, then said, "Give them exactly what they're asking for." I frowned. "You mean, take the wall down?" "Yep." I sat up straight. "Greg, the engineer said the slope will fail." "I know," he said calmly. "That's why you make sure everything is documented. You already warned them. You have the report. Now you get them to formally demand removal. In writing, clearly, no ambiguity." And then, he let that hang for a second. "And then you comply." There was a long silence on my end. I could hear my own breathing, feel that slow burn finally starting to turn into something sharper. "And when it fails?" I asked. Greg didn't hesitate. "Then it's on them." Now, I'm not the kind of guy who looks for trouble, but I also don't walk away from it when it shows up at my door wearing a suit and calling itself authority. And what Melissa was doing, it wasn't about safety, it wasn't about the neighborhood, it was about control, plain and simple. She wanted that wall gone because it didn't fit her picture. So I took Greg's advice. I wrote back, polite as ever, asking for formal confirmation that the HOA was requiring the complete removal of the retaining wall, fully aware of the structural implications outlined in the engineer's report I had already provided. No attitude, no sarcasm, just clean, clear language. A few days later, I got exactly what I needed. Official letter. HOA letterhead. Signed. Remove the wall. No mention of slope stability. No acknowledgement of the risks. Just a demand. I remember holding that letter and thinking, all right, you really want this. So I gave it to them. September 14th, I rented an excavator. Big machine, loud enough to make sure the whole neighborhood knew something was happening. Not out of spite, just practicality. You don't quietly remove a structure like that. Word got around fast. By mid-morning, a couple of neighbors had wandered over, curious, a little uneasy. Old Mr. Jensen from 2 houses down stood there with his hands in his pockets, watching me line up the bucket against the first railroad tie. "You sure about this, Dan?" he asked. I shrugged slightly. "Not my call anymore." He looked down the hill, then back at me. "That wall's been holding this slope together longer than she's been here." "Yeah," I said quietly, "I know." Around noon, Melissa stepped out onto her deck, wine glass in hand, sunglasses on, like she was watching a show she'd been waiting for. She gave me a little wave, almost playful. I waved back, and then I pulled the first tie loose. There's a sound that wood makes when it's been under pressure for years and suddenly gets released, a deep creak, followed by this subtle shift in the earth behind it. You don't hear it unless you're paying attention. I heard it. One by one, I took them out. 6 hours straight. Sweat, dirt, engine noise filling the air, and underneath it all, that quiet sense that something bigger had just been set in motion. By the time I finished, the wall was gone. Completely gone. Just a raw, exposed slope of soil sitting there, held together by nothing but hope and dry weather. Melissa raised her glass slightly from her deck, like she was toasting the view. I shut off the excavator, climbed down, and for a second, I just stood there looking at that hillside. Then I went inside, and I waited. Now, if you've ever lived in Oregon, you know the rain doesn't ask for permission, it just shows up when it's ready. And that year, it didn't take long. September 22nd, the forecast started mentioning a system moving in. Nothing unusual, just moderate rainfall. By the 23rd, it wasn't moderate anymore. It poured. Not a steady drizzle, real rain. The kind that hits your roof hard enough to wake you up, runs down the windows in sheets, turns the ground dark and heavy within hours. I stood by the back window that first night, watching the slope. You could see it changing, not dramatically, not yet, but the soil was soaking, swelling, getting heavier by the hour. By the second day, we'd gotten over 6 inches. That's when the ground starts to lose its grip. Water fills the spaces between soil particles, reduces friction, and once that balance tips, gravity takes over. Doesn't matter how nice your pool looks, doesn't matter how much you spent on landscaping, gravity always wins. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I didn't expect what might happen, but because I did. Around 2 a.m., I was lying there staring at the ceiling when I heard it. At first, it was low, almost like distant thunder. Then it grew. A deep, rolling sound, like something massive shifting, breaking loose. And in that moment, I knew. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark. For a split second, everything was still. Then the hillside moved. Not slowly, not gradually, it just gave way. The entire slope collapsed in one heavy surge. Earth, mud, water all sliding together, picking up speed as it went, tearing through the space where the wall used to stand like it had been waiting for years to do exactly this. And all I could think, standing there in the dark, watching it happen, was, this didn't have to happen. But once things start moving like that, there's no stopping them. By the time that slope finished moving, it was quiet again. That was the part that stuck with me the most. Not the noise, not the chaos, but the silence right after, like the earth had just exhaled and gone still. I stood there for a few seconds, maybe longer, just looking out into the dark, trying to process what I'd just seen, even though I already knew exactly what it meant. Then the lights started coming on. One house, then another. Porch lights, kitchen lights, silhouettes moving behind curtains. And then, the first shout. It came from downhill. Then another. And another. I grabbed my jacket, stepped outside, and the smell hit me immediately. Wet soil, heavy and raw, like the ground had been ripped open. I walked toward the edge of my property and looked down. Even in the dim light, you could see it. The entire hillside had shifted forward, a thick wave of mud and debris that had rolled straight into the properties below. Melissa's yard took the worst of it. Her infinity pool, that clean, perfect line she was so proud of, it was gone. Not broken, not cracked, just buried. Filled nearly halfway with mud, the glass railing shattered, equipment box tilted and sparking faintly as water seeped in. The deck she used to stand on covered. Her whole backyard looked like it had been swallowed. And it didn't stop there. The slide kept going, spilling into the next 2 houses. One basement window blown in, mud pouring inside like a slow flood. The other, You could already see a crack running along the foundation, thin but unmistakable. That's when I saw her. Melissa was standing barefoot in what used to be her patio, soaked, shaking, yelling into her phone. Probably insurance, maybe emergency services. I couldn't tell. Her voice carried up the hill, sharp, frantic, nothing like the controlled tone she had when we first met. Then she looked up, and she saw me. For a second, she just stared. Then she started climbing, slipping a little in the mud, not caring, just coming straight toward me. By the time she reached the bottom of my slope, she was furious, eyes wide, face tight, pointing back at the destruction like I somehow needed help seeing it. "What did you do?" she shouted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I did exactly what you asked me to do. Her expression twisted. "You knew this would happen." I held her gaze. "Yeah, I did." She stepped closer, mud on her legs, breath quick. "Then why would you?" "Because you told me to remove the wall," I said, calm, steady, in writing. "After I sent you an engineer's report explaining exactly what would happen if I did." That stopped her. Not completely, but enough. You could see it in her face, that moment where the anger runs into something solid. Reality. "This is your fault," she said, but it sounded weaker now. I shook my head slightly. "No, this is gravity. And a bad decision." She just stared at me, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered that letter. The fines. The way she stood on that deck with her wine glass while I tore down the one thing holding that hill in place. Sirens started in the distance not long after. Fire trucks, police, the usual routine. Statements, photos, questions. I told them exactly what happened, showed them the documentation, the engineer's report, the HOA letter. No exaggeration, no spin, just facts. Over the next few days, everything unraveled fast. Insurance adjusters came through, walking the properties, taking notes, shaking their heads. Total claims across the 3 houses, somewhere around $150,000. Melissa's pool alone, close to 90. And then, the phone call started. First from her, then from her attorney. This time, the tone was different. No more polished confidence. Now it was urgency, pressure, a quiet kind of panic hiding behind formal language. They tried to suggest shared responsibility, implied negligence, hinted that I should have refused to comply. I let Greg handle it. He sent one letter back. Just one. Attached every document. The warnings, the report, the HOA demand, all of it laid out in a timeline so clear a kid could follow it. And at the bottom, a simple statement. I would be willing to rebuild the retaining wall immediately to prevent further damage, under one condition. They cover everything. Construction, labor, materials, all of it. Plus a long-term maintenance agreement. And one clause. The same one Greg insisted on. The one that made me pause for a second before agreeing. Not because it was unfair, but because it was exact. If payment is ever more than 30 days late, the wall comes down again. Legally. Fully documented. No argument. When Melissa saw that, she didn't call me. She didn't come up the hill. She resigned as HOA president 3 weeks later. The board, a lot quieter now, approved the agreement. They didn't have much choice. By then, the evidence wasn't just on paper. It was sitting in their backyards, drying in thick layers of mud. I rebuilt the wall in November. Same design. Same railroad ties. Same eyesore. Only difference now, everybody understood what it actually was. A few of the neighbors came by while I was working. Mr. Jensen again, shaking his head, looking down at the finished wall like it was something new. "Funny thing," he said, "never noticed how good this thing looked before." I smiled a little. Yeah, amazing what context does. Life settled back into something normal after that. Repairs got done, grass grew back, people stopped talking about it as much. But every now and then, especially when the rain starts up again, you can feel it. That memory sitting just under the surface. And Melissa, she still lives there. We don't talk. Don't need to. But every October, like clockwork, I get a check. Maintenance contract. Signed on time. And I cash it. Not with anger. Not even with satisfaction. Really, just a quiet understanding of how things played out. Because the truth is this whole thing could have gone a different way. One conversation, one moment of actually listening instead of pushing, and none of it would have happened. But that's the thing about people. Sometimes they don't learn from warnings. Sometimes they need consequences. So I'm curious. If you were in my position, would you have done the same thing? Or would you have fought it differently? And more importantly, where do you draw the line between following the rules and knowing when the rules are wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you'd think.